Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the Superman movie, James Gunn's Superman, as it is most aptly been named online more recently, winning the weekend with $122 million. And even though, of course, you do have fans of this movie, fans of James Gunn, a lot of annoying people on the internet, and also, of course, the mainstream media trades running with this as a huge victory for Superman, for James Gunn, and for the new DCU, whatever it is that they're going to be calling it these days, what is very clear is when you actually look at the numbers here, again, as far as the individual release is concerned, as far as where this film matches up to its budget, hey, jury's still out on that because we won't really know until the second weekend of release if there is a large drop-off, if it is a decent-sized drop-off. We really honestly won't know. But what we can say as of right now is, yeah, this movie is not doing as well as films like The Batman did, or even films like Superman Returns. That's right, Superman Returns. Remember that movie? Remember how everyone was hating on that movie and talking about how bad that film was and a bad adaptation it was? Again, some people more so than others. Well, this movie made less than that. And again, of course, you have to adjust for inflation, or at the very least, look at ticket sales and do those comparisons, because either way, it shows you the same exact story, which is simply that, yes, as an individual release, it seems like this film is doing okay. Again, that budget is still pretty sizable as far as the actual projections and how much the film cost to make. Not only that, but also marketing costs in addition to that. The fact also that the film is really not doing much of anything internationally, and in some markets was even losing to Jurassic World. That's, again, pretty insane for that to happen for a brand new release up against a film about CGI dinosaurs, which is a, again, garbage film in Jurassic World Rebirth. But even with all of that being said, yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. People, for some reason, get triggered every time that is mentioned about this film being a mixed bag, but it is the truth. If you look at the online conversation going on right now, I honestly think that Criticlist is the best place for that, because you have people coming out of this film loving it. You have other people coming out hating it, and then you have people like me that are kind of in the middle of it saying, yeah, it's not the greatest film ever. It is not really setting the stage for a future franchise. It's not as good as of a movie as like an Iron Man was for the Marvel franchise, right? For that MCU, that launching point. This doesn't really seem like it's going to be doing that. And the box office, as of right now, seems actually very much to be supporting that, because whether you're comparing it to films released in 2025, whether you're comparing it to Snyderverse movies, whether you're comparing it to other films like The Batman, no matter which lane you want to take, in the game of comparisons, this movie loses almost every single time. And I think that that is something that for some reason people just don't want to admit. And again, this is not saying that the film is going to lose a boatload of money. This is not saying the film is a guaranteed flop. But what it is saying is that this movie is not as high as the online commentary would make it seem. Basically, the amount of people online and the amount of positivity surrounding this movie and the people who are really pushing those narratives, you would have to think that if that was actually true, right? Because the often argument is, well, you're just in your online bubble, and this is just what your perception is. Well, now we have worldwide data. And if the positive perception, if the argument from that positive direction was actually true, you would think that the box office would also reflect that. But that's not really what we're seeing at this point in time. Even people like Box Office Theory, right, who in these early projections at one point had the film as high as $170 million in his domestic estimates, had to bring it down quite a bit, still quite high, and still ended up being, again, off as far as where this film eventually landed. Not just Box Office Theory, but Box Office World, and in some ways, even Box Office Pro, though it did fall within the range that they had. The only people that this film surprised or did better than were the trades. But if anyone's been following the box office for any length of time, we all know the trades have been garbage for decades, or rather, sorry, not decades, for years now, right? We know that the online presence of places like Box Office Theory and Pro have shown that they are oftentimes much more consistently on the line, right? Very much on point when it comes to their overall projections, because they're looking at other things that the studios don't actually look at, or like the shows over at Deadline, like Tony, oftentimes don't look at either. And what we have again in front of us is, I think, a very mixed bag. And again, ready for those comments who are just gonna, again, it's almost Snyder level at this point, because the amount of comments that are just calling out anyone being even somewhat critical of this movie, or just laying out facts, basic mathematics, it's honestly kind of amazing to me that that is what is going on there. But again, no surprise here from Tony. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's a box office hit. Not yet. You kind of have to make your money back and have a path towards making your money back before you get to that point. And as of right now, we really just don't know until next weekend's numbers come in. Even good old Nance over at Deadline saying Superman powers to 217 million globally. All right, even if you've just been following my channel and not anything else for any length of time, 217 million, okay, yeah, that's about 100 million less than the Minecraft movie, about 100 million less than Lilo and Stitch live action, about 100 million less than Jurassic World Rebirth. So, yeah, you could argue, well, it's going to be in the top 5, maybe, of biggest opening weekends of 2025, maybe. However, when you're $100 million less than something else, in that game of comparisons, that's still pretty significant. And again, if we're talking about what the online perception is, if you are in that community, in that mindset where you think, oh man, everyone's loving this movie and y'all are just in y'all's negative circle over here, again, $100 million? Who's actually in the circle? Who's actually in, kind of in their ideological circles, thinking and perceiving the world in an incorrect fashion? Again, that's why I like just being in the middle here, because that's honestly where the truth ends up being. Because the fact is, yeah, this is a big number for 2025, but it's not even close to being the biggest number of 2025, and it's not looking like it's going to be either. And when you compare this to other films, it doesn't get that much better either. It also does mention the fact that Jurassic World Rebirth has indeed crossed $500 million $500 million worldwide. So yeah, Jurassic World is right now on pace to do pretty well too. And Lilo and Stitch, remember a long time ago I said, hey, it's going to likely make $1 billion, and then, kind of push back on that saying, maybe, I don't know, it seems to be dropping off quite a bit. Well, sure enough, we can now say it will hit $1 billion, probably either sometime this week, at the very latest next weekend, and it, again, 100% chance now of getting into the $1 billion club, and we'll look at those numbers as they stand. Let's go over to thenumbers.com, though, just to look at what the overall totals are for their opening weekends, or for, rather, this past weekend domestically. So Superman, $122 million, and again, on paper, that seems like a pretty good number. But remember, there's been much bigger releases so far, even just in 2025 alone. Now, there are some films that I do want to have comparisons to. I've brought these up before on this channel and also on other channels as well, comparing these films to Snyderverse films, comparing this film to the Matt Reeves Batman, right? These are all films that have been in that same conversation. I even decided to throw in, hey, let's talk about Superman Returns from 2006 and see where that film ended up in the long run game here. And what you see ultimately is, with all but one exception, it loses to every single one of these movies. So first off, Man of Steel. Man of Steel, by the end of its first Sunday, had 179 million. Now, some of you might be saying, well, wait a minute, right? I've looked up the numbers myself, and I don't get 179. Well, remember, you have to adjust for inflation. And again, whether you want to do inflation, whether you want to look at ticket sales, again, just take the average ticket price for 2013, put that in, and you'll see it'll tell almost the same exact story, right? They almost always go hand in hand, line in line with each other. The fact is, less people bought tickets to Superman, James Gunn Superman, than to Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, right? That's just a verifiable fact. Some others might say, well, wait a minute, they seem to have gotten an early start, right? With $61 million being reported on the first Friday, Thursday, but then you have $78 million being reported there. Okay, even if you take that into account, you're still looking at $160 million versus 122, and therefore it still ultimately wins that battle. Up against BVS, it's not even close, $217 million. Up against Matt Reeves The Batman, when adjusted, is $143 million. So a $20 million advantage there. The Batman ended up going on to make an adjusted $829 million. And so does that mean that we could potentially see Superman do something similar? Maybe. Again, Batman itself actually had its own divisiveness to it, right? I think a lot of people sometimes get caught up in these online bubbles, right? The Batman, I think, had its own online bubble where people are like, oh, babe, everyone seems to be really liking and praising this movie. But the fact is that it dropped off quite a bit as time went on and did not make nearly as much as it should have based off of its own opening weekend. But again, we'll have to save that for another day. Justice League, that's right, that's, Zach... Oh my God, not Zack Snyder. Joss Whedon's Justice League made $118 million when adjusted, so it just barely beats out that movie, which we all know was a catastrophic, failure in many ways. And then Superman Returns at $146 million. That's right, the 2006 movie. 146. Now, this is the one where I do think you have some argument to be made here, because for some reason it does say 28 million is what it made on its first Thursday, Friday, and because of probably an extended weekend, June 28th is when that film released, you had an extended run, which brought it up to 83 million, and so you could argue like, okay, overall, but still, the fact that even by the end of its first Sunday, Superman Returns is even in the discussion, based off of how that film was ultimately received, I think does speak quite a bit Two, how it's not really as rosy of a picture as many of the people who are huge fans of this movie are seeming to try to put out there. And again, whether you're bringing up Zack Snyder films, whether you're bringing up The Batman, whether you're bringing up even films like Superman Returns, it all still comes out to say the same thing, which is that this film is just not doing as well as the people who are positively praising it are saying it is actually doing, or are claiming it to actually be. And again, if that level of positivity, if that level of reception was as universal as you think it is, these numbers would be much different. This would be a much higher number. Even if you put this up against Guardians of the Galaxy, by the way, guess what? Guardians of the Galaxy beats this movie out. So even if you want to just keep it within the James Gunn verse, yeah, this movie is just not up there to the same level or to the same degree. And again, we'll have to save what this film will do individually up until next weekend when we get those second weekend drop-off numbers. But as of right now, this is, again, I don't think what Warner Brothers was expecting for this movie. I don't think what James Gunn was expecting or hoping for this movie. And I think if people who are really praising this film are honest with themselves, they'll say, yeah, you know what? This film should have done a lot better than what it's actually doing right now. Jurassic World Rebirth, $40 million in its second weekend, 57% drop, so pretty big drop off there. Not the worst that we've seen, though. MCU films have had a much worse second weekends before. This still is also making quite a bit of money, not just domestically, but internationally too, right? This film is actually almost on par. The separation is not as vast as you might think between those two movies, and because of that, Rebirth is actually on pace now to be able to get upwards of $800 to $900+ million by the end of its run, which is still a lot less than the $1 billion made by Dominion back a few years ago, but does show, right, that it is still tracking very strongly, and because of its budget, will likely make some profit for them going forward for Universal. F1, the movie, 50% drop there in its third weekend of release, so again, laking out a bit, but budget is the issue there, as we mentioned before, right? Because of the deals behind the scenes between Warner Brothers and Apple Studios, both studios are probably going to be fine in the long run. Those international numbers are a lot stronger. Domestically, though, it's just not really making that much of a splash there. How to Train Your Dragon live action, 31% drop. Elio, 33% drop. And Lilo and Stitch still hanging around with 32% hold there. Still at over 2,000 screens after 8 weeks. And so by the end of its 9th weekend, it will indeed hit $1 billion. So let's go to the international numbers here. So Superman, $217 million globally. So remember, if you're comparing films of 2025, not even close to being a top contender in this case, right? Well below, 100 million or so below Jurassic World Rebirth, etc. So it is not quite there. So again, if the audience is supposedly there for this movie, if you just think that the film is bad, or you are just stuck in your own bubble, if that's your argument, again, the numbers don't really seem to back up what you are saying here. And also, very importantly, the international community is just not really showing up for this movie, right? For a film like this, a type of global launch that you're seeing here, where it's getting released in every major market, domestic and international, on the same day, you would expect those internationals to be stronger than the domestic totals. This film only made $95 million internationally versus $122 million here domestically. That is not a good sign in general. And so that actually could be the story of what we follow, is how less does it make internationally than some of these other films that we've mentioned, and what does that mean as far as long-term box office, right? Remember, most films tend to make about 30% of their entire global box office in their opening weekend in their global debut. That would mean this film is looking at, what, $600 to $650 million in total. And you might hear some people say, hey, that'd be really, really good. The studio said $500 million. We all know the studio is just blowing air and smoke up everyone's, rear ends just to try to make a desperate plea of, hey, this is all we really need, guys. But again, anyone who's actually following box office, who actually follows the studio's numbers, who actually follows the budgets and the marketing cost of these movies, knows you need a lot more than just $500 million to make your money back on a movie like this. And if you're really trying to launch a franchise from a film like this, you expect this to do much better, especially when you have the name James Gunn behind it, right? If everyone was so universally loving of James Gunn, this would be doing as well as his other releases. And again, in comparison to some of the other films we see, it's just really not quite up there. Jurassic World Rebirth 2025 now at $529 million. So this film, again, doing not only well internationally, but domestically too. 232 versus 297. So clearly international dominance there. But the fact that even domestically, hey, turns out a lot of people like really bad movies featuring CGI dinosaurs. Who would have thunk, right? It's not like we've been seeing that happen with every single one of its releases. But we are also now seeing that the chances of this film, making a lot less than the last movie are a lot higher as well. Law of diminishing returns means eventually they're not going to be able to make these movies anymore and continue to be profitable. F1, the movie, now at $393 million, again, doing better than many people may have expected, but again, it's kind of in its own weird situation. How to Train Your Dragon, $560 million, again, doing well here, but again, I think this is a film people thought would be doing a lot better, maybe a little bit closer to $1 billion, but it's not really there. Elio, again, big flop of the year for Disney, even though it's, again, 33% hold seemed like very strong down the line, down the stretch, because its starting point was so low. It is doing better than expectation, but it is still doing, obviously, a lot worse than what the perceived budget on that film is. And why do I think Lilo and Stitch is going to make $1 billion? Well, because as of this weekend, at least according to thenumbers.com, it has reached $994 million. That's right. It only needs to make $6 million more. It made around $2 million domestically, so this past weekend, and so it made a few extra more $1 million internationally. And so therefore, yeah, by the end of this week, domestically, might be able to push it over the edge. If not, next weekend's internationals will will very easily make this movie the first $1 billion film of 2025. That's right. The first film to reach $1 billion will be live action Lilo and Stitch, and will not be the other films, right? Right now, Jurassic World Rebirth likely won't hit $1 billion at this point. Superman, based on the opening weekend, I would say very small chance, very little chance of that ever happening for that movie. And again, that movie will be lucky to even get close to what The Batman did. And I think for a lot of people, that is the standard. For some people, you might not care about that comparison, but for others, they said, hey, that's the standard. If you're not able to reach the levels of The Batman, okay, that franchise is not looking good going forward. But again, that depends on where you stand on that issue. Lilo and Stitch, though, will make $1 billion, and now there is no doubt about it. Let's go to the charts, because we love Chotsy on OMB reviews. And so first, Jurassic World Rebirth, since now we have the official second weekend numbers, we can project the film will make somewhere between, again, historically, this is where most films fall. Most films tend to make around 70 to 50% of their entire box office in the first 2 weekends globally. And so with that in mind, the film will make somewhere between $756 million to $1 billion, which means the average of that would be around $900 million. That sounds about right to me, right? It seems based off of the previous films, we've seen, a couple 100,000 here and there being lost every single time a new Jurassic World has come out, after the last one, especially as bad as it was. I think that definitely played a part in all of this too. But with the budget being reported at $180 million, total marketing costs, again, those can all fluctuate very much. This is looking very good for them. So right now we have projections of their budget, their net profits being between 180 to 365 million. So obviously that's a 2.5 multiplier, so probably closer to 175 to 350 still. That's massive profits for this movie, and if it gets towards that higher end, yeah, it could very much easily make back its total cost with both budget and marketing, which is something that you definitely want to see return on investment wise. As of right now, it's still $29 million in the red, and it's just because it is still a sizable budget, and so you need to make a lot more than $500 million. This also should, again, give you an idea and speak to why Superman is not in the best position as of right now, because if this is where this movie is, and it's $29 million in the red, and we know that Superman's budget is higher than what Jurassic World's was, yeah, that should give you an idea about why it's not likely for Superman to reach the same levels of Jurassic World Rebirth, especially because opening weekend comparisons, and I imagine we'll also have the second weekend comparisons too, once those numbers actually come out next week. F1, actually going back to James Gunn Superman. So $217 million, $11 million in China, $122 million domestic. And that's why this is where I think the story honestly is the most interesting. So that means around $84 million is what's being reported from all of the every market outside of China. And that, I think, is going to be a big story going forward, because it's not going to really raise the scoreboard all that high. It's not going to really add to the scoreboard in China alone, right? Some movies, like, for instance, you look at what Jurassic World typically has done in the past. Even this is pretty low for a Jurassic World movie, I feel. For that country, but just in general, what it's going to really show you, though, is that the international numbers are just coming in much lower than I think anyone would have anticipated. So the domestics might be able to hold well, might be able to hold even strongly, but if those internationals are not also playing, that affects your entire overall global totals. And we all know this is a global game in today's world. And so, yeah, if you get to one of the higher domestic releases of the summer, but your international is significantly lower than anything else that has been done, by the bigger films. Like, again, F1, the movie, is at $248 million right now. That's really what's driving that movie going forward. I'm sorry, but James Gunn's Superman is not really seemingly tracking on that way. Remember that it has released in every major market. There's no markets that it's like, oh, just wait until releases here and then the audience will show up. It's just not really showing for this movie. And again, we'll know by next weekend. We'll know once those holds come in where the film actually stands. But as of right now, it's a bit of a mixed bag, right? It is not, as far as we know as of right now, a guaranteed flop by any means, but it does have a long way to go, right? It had a budget. And again, the reports have been all over the place. We know that the numbers.com has this at 225. So even if you have that in there, that's still $675 million that you need to make to break even. Even if you want to be the most generous of all and say it was $180 million, again, I think that's still a bunch of bunk. You're still having a $540 million break even point. Based off of where it is right now, it's looking like it will maybe just get past that point. And when your tentpole movie, when the movie set to get everything started for your universe is just barely making profit, that is not a good thing. I don't care where you stand on the issue. I don't care if you're a Snyder bro. I don't care if you're a James Gunn fanatic. I don't care where you are in that, whether you love this movie, hate this movie, or are kind of in between like I am. When it comes down to it, these numbers are not nearly as strong as I think what most people would want to have seen for this movie, especially people who wanted to see this film be successful. I don't think that these numbers are what you may have even expected it to be, because as of right now, what we are saying is that, hey, there's a chance for this film to lose money, but at the very least, this film will be a very, very, very small, barely break even type performance. And again, we won't know until next weekend, but we do know right now film is far below where some of the other films, some of the other bigger releases of this year have come out, well below the $300 million. I was saying right even yesterday on the Salty Saturday stream, hey, if this movie gets to $300+ million, we'll have a very different discussion. The fact that this film barely broke $200 million, that's not a good sign. But anyway, those are my thoughts on this. You might have very different ones. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And again, please let me know, what comparison do you think is a fair one? I'm sure everyone's going to say, oh, you can't really compare it to this and you can't compare it to this. Okay, well then what can we compare it to? And if your answer is we can't compare it to anything, okay, well that kind of, I think, should hopefully speak to how you're probably stuck in your own bubble there, right? Where you think, hey, this movie is amazing and everyone agrees with me and the audiences are loving this movie and you're just crazy. It's like, okay, then why didn't it make as much as Rebirth did? And Rebirth was universally panned by a lot of people, right? Some would argue that that movie has had a mixed release overall, right? And so, and again, it's also based off of what the projected numbers were, right? This film was projected to do a lot more than this from the likes of Box Office Theory and others, and it came in underneath it, which tells me a lot of that online presence was fool's gold. A lot of that online positivity, I think, is almost mimicking, and it's, people are going to probably hate when I say this, but it honestly feels like a lot of people who are supporting the James Gunn Superman are no different than what we saw with the Snyderverse and the Snyder Bros, where in their own heads, they are seeing this film as being the end-all be-all and as being amazing, and James Gunn is such a beautiful filmmaker, and everything about this is amazing, and you're just crazy, and the world doesn't agree with you. And again, I'm sure you can bring up a lot better comparisons or a lot, let's just say more divisive comparisons there because of the fact that Zack Snyder's films were almost never universally loved or panned in the same way that this movie seems to be, but it is having that very same feeling. And the fact that this, again, movie's money is coming in below a lot of the Zack Snyder films, again, that seems to indicate to me that maybe James Gunn was not the right person for this, and maybe, at the very least, we could agree he's definitely a polarizing figure, and that may have actually been the worst thing to happen to this film, which should have been a lot bigger. Again, when it's a Superman movie, when it's setting off and trying to kick off your DCU, and you could also argue, hey, this just shows you all the damage that was done by the Zack Snyderverse. Maybe. But still, if this is universally loved and praised, where are the numbers? This discussion can change next weekend. If we've got massive holds happening next weekend, we will absolutely update these numbers, and we will go forward with them. But I just look at the numbers as they are, as they stand. I compare them to what I possibly can. And as of right now, I don't think it's looking all that great for this movie. But you might think differently. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, make sure you smash that like button, smash that rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Call me a hater if you want in the comment section. I'm just a guy following the math, following the numbers. That's all I can really do. I follow the numbers. I follow the trends. I look at the budgets. And hey, please explain to me, show me what it is that I've gotten wrong here, other than just it's not a fair comparison, because that just isn't enough with an opening weekend like this. Anyway, you guys are great. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Sunday, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribe Star people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing, and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.